What is up, guys? Happy Wednesday. Welcome to the Bearded Talk podcast. Really exciting episode for you today. Going to be lots and lots of fun. If you're new here, we have weekly podcasts every week, which is why they're weekly. Anyway, you should definitely subscribe in your podcast player of choice, Apple Podcasts, of course, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. If there's a place we don't show up, DM us on Instagram at The Bearded Talk, and we'll try and get out there. So why not? But today's guest, super cool guy from across the pond, now moved to Georgia. Luke Beard, the founder of Exposure, which is like a modern publishing platform for, photographers, visual storytellers, like they're getting into video. It's really, really cool. I would say probably the most beautiful photography websites on the internet, period. Full stop. I'm just going to go there. He founded it. It's so fun. It's such a nice, refreshing place to view visual stories, mostly photography for me. And honestly, it's just like, it makes me love photography again. So Luke created that. I want to talk about his story a little bit about moving to the US, all that kind of stuff, and then just a little bit of, philosophy. So absolutely fun episode with Luke Beard. Without any further ado, here is Luke. Luke Beard, obviously somebody who has beard in their last name, I'm going to be a huge freaking fan of compared to have you on the Bearded Talk podcast. So, yeah, how the frick are you, dude? I have to ask, just how are you doing this year, man?
How do people even answer that question at this point? I think rough around the edges is my default response these days because, I think this year has been mostly like, oh, look how privileged I am. In contrast of what is going on in the rest of the world, being in America is intense. Otherwise, like I'm actually doing pretty well. Like since I'm not going out anywhere, I'm actually in the best shape I've ever been in, weirdly. And in general, things are kind of moving in a great direction. But in the contrast of everything else, it's mostly just a series of introspective moments in between, like, oh, this feels okay for a second. And then you're like, oh God.
Yeah, no, totally. It's a weird, I expect us to get a movie, and maybe there's already one like this, where there is going to be a movie or something of some sort where your personal life is going super well, but your acknowledgement of, because I think people like this, I don't know if I came from the church world, right? So you'd always hear like missionaries and people who are like, hey, there's this thing happening in a country that you're not, we're familiar with, or a place that's not where you live. And you'd always hear it and be like, oh, that's sad. You didn't feel it. You're just, you heard it, you saw it, you didn't feel it. And then now as Americans, and obviously, bad things have been going on in America for a long time. That might not be our favorite thing. Man, I told you this podcast is going to be different, Luke.
That's great. No, keep going.
If you start to recognize some of those things and your place either in or out of it, there's a certain dread to that. There's a certain like slog, guilt, maybe, I don't know, but you definitely recognize the privilege, and it's a hard contrast to go along with that. While hopefully, I know both you and I are very passionate, either outspoken wise or trying to do something about it. And so it's an interesting dichotomy. I feel like this year is that year where it's like fully recognized in so many people, where like life is good, I'm in shape, we're not spending money because we're not going out, taking a lot of photos, right? You have all these cool things, you got a new hat, you got a USPS hat that's awesome, but then it's like, oh, okay, there's some other things going on that I'm gonna do my best to help, quote unquote, fix, but at the same time it is not easily solved.
Yeah, I mean, it's if you are in the position where a global pandemic, economic downturn, the largest like race-related protests in modern American history, is like if all these things can happen and your life doesn't really, like, you are like not personally affected by things, then you have a ginormous amount of privilege that you should confront and consider your place in all of this. And like, I'm actually so I'm British originally, and I've been in the US like I guess, coming up on 10 years straight. Is that right? Maybe
I thought 2012. Yeah, 8 years, right?
8 years. Yeah. So, and there is a certain like level of kind of like novelty to moving to the US, especially when I moved to San Francisco and kind of like played startup boy for a while, and like that's its own bubble. And then I've been in Atlanta for like, it's coming up 3.5, nearly 4 years now. So I'm getting this like contrasting worlds and history and things like that. So, like this again, like understanding if you are in a position where nothing changes and a lot of things are happening, like there's lots to consider. And yeah, there's ways for everybody to help, but it's like kind of like what you can help with versus like trying to help do everything. That's also a struggle. But but otherwise, like, I'm okay.
That's awesome. How
are you?
What's your workout of choice? I feel like it's running, right? You're a big runner.
Yes. As of recently, I realized that I could run a little bit. Well, the backstory is I drank too much at the start of the pandemic, was anxious and felt pretty awful all the time for like 2.5 months. I was like, why do I feel anxious and awful all the time? And then I was like, oh, I see what's going on here. And then I just started walking like 2 hours a day. Because again, like if you don't have a social life, there's a new swath of time to do something in. So yeah, I would just do the same loop every day. Listen to a ton of podcasts, ton of books, like, actually, feel like I did kind of learn a lot during that time. And then Abby, my spouse, she used to do a lot of TRX in San Francisco. For those who don't know what a TRX is, it's suspension training.
Yeah.
Basically just like 2 bands you kind of like lift your own body weight with. A lot of squats and rows. So she bought some bands for that, and the app is really good. It has sessions you can like learn from. So I just did that for 15 minutes a day, and kind of that just made I was just in a good shape to start running versus like just start running in the poorer shape. But yeah, now it's kind of like I enjoy the kind of quasi culture I'm involved with, and like I get to buy the fancy brands and things like that, which is obviously a big point of like good stuff. Is like I can get away with wearing like a Tracksmith like pair of shorts now and feel good about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's mostly running every day now. It has helped kind of keep everything in check, and just like, it's weird to be a different shape than when you started at the start of the year.
Yeah, no, totally. But I mean, your mental health, I assume, has gone way up since the drinking and anxious time, at some level, it does help. Our gyms closed here for a long time earlier this year, and I didn't feel comfortable going back when they opened. And I talked to my wife and I said, "Hey, can we buy bikes?" We didn't have any bikes, and she was like, "Yeah, sure." So we bought like pretty nice hybrids, Specialized, right? And I was like, "Oh, okay. So we have the nice gear. Now we really need to show that we're riding and making it happen." And so it was really funny. Like I've done 600 miles this year, or since August, so trying to put some numbers in. It's low impact for me, which is great. And then, my mental state is so much better, it's one of those things that like, we know that it's going to make it better, but I think like other people who work out every day are just like, oh, okay, I get it now. And it's, at least for me, it's the encouragement to do it. This is not a fitness podcast, but it's like
it is now. Sorry, it gets swole, everybody.
Yeah. The happiness after, right? The after work. At least for me, I never want to do it, but after I'm done, I'm like, oh, that was actually awesome. That was really cool, and I feel good. So
yeah, the habitualness of it has helped a lot. Like a little routine, which I can also get better at. Like that's like, humans are inherently kind of like want to one up themselves, if not other people.
Yeah.
So like seeing genuine progression from just walking to starting running to now I can do 5 miles a day, no problem. And hopefully trying to do my first half marathon like on this weekend. And I'm like, that's like to my fuzzy little like, lizard brain, that's like, you're doing great. It's there's rules. I'm having a great time. But yeah, that's helping me sleep, etc. And also my spouse is a therapist too, so like there's lots of mental health discussions in our house. but it's just one part, obviously, of looking after yourself. But I can understand that it is also in part a privilege to be able to do that. And
totally.
Yeah.
No, I love that. So give me a little background on Luke Beard and the Beard dynasty, if you will. You immigrated here 8 years ago. You're, in my mind, I look at Luke as a fellow photographer, but you also run Exposure, which I won't say what it is because I'll probably F it up. I know what it is. I use it, but I'm like, all right, Luke probably has a better pitch, obviously. So give me a little bit of the Luke background and rundown. I mean, you mentioned you moved to San Francisco, but before that, what was Luke's life like?
Sure. So, oh God, it's such a weird, long, windy story at this point. Yeah, so I'm from the Forest of Dean, which is like this rural area in the United Kingdom. It's kind of right on the border of Wales. It's picturesque. They filmed like Merlin there, and the forest scene from A Force Awakens is my hometown. That's like my claim to fame, is that I can say they filmed some Star Wars there, which is pretty cool. It's a very beautiful time, but you stay there, you die there, kind of place. And I kind of got my hands on a computer very early on, thankfully to my parents, who like let me run rampant on the internet and let me destroy their computer with LimeWire and things like that. But that did lead to a kind of like maybe I should go get some sort of accreditation in some sort of computer stuff. So I did basically it's called a BTech National in ICT, which is really, they just taught you like, here's how to use a spreadsheet, like here's the basics of HTML. And then there was a section on Photoshop, which I gravitated towards immensely. I was like, oh, I understand this, because in my brain, I've always wanted to like be creative, I guess. And that led to kind of doing band artwork, band posters, band t-shirts. So like I started as a graphic designer in music world, ended up getting a job in a web design agency and doing kind of like relatively like, unsexy work, like housing development websites and things like that. But I did learn a lot about client relationships and things like that. And then eventually kind of that job, after a few years, I was like, I really find Twitter interesting, because I was kind of part of design Twitter at that point, like watching people, share their tutorials and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, do people build Twitter? Is that how it works? It's like, is there people working on it? And this is like before I knew anything, and I had to like Google Silicon Valley or startup, and like none of this vocabulary was really part of my world. Yeah. But once I figured out that people make this sort of product, I was like, I think I would like to give this a go. So through various like happenstance, being on Twitter, tweeting to people situations, I ended up linking up this company called Zerply, who were basically like creative LinkedIn kind of at the point where they were at. And they were kind of like, you are a designer, we need a designer, we're applying for YC, do you want to come like work in Palo Alto, like in the Bay Area for 5 weeks? And, my 23, 25-year-old brain, and was like, yeah, this sounds like a great idea. I asked my dad, I was like, is this smart to go to Palo Alto with a bunch of Estonian strangers? And he's like, sure, probably do it. I was like, okay. So this is basically like my startup boy journey, was getting on a plane to go to work in a house with a bunch of dorks. Yeah. And just design landing pages and app UI and just like work on something for 5 weeks straight.
That's not bad though. Like your first, just to take a break, your first Palo Alto experience was with Y Combinator, or like was with a...
They were flying. They didn't get it.
Oh, okay. Okay. So that helps. For anybody who doesn't know, like Y Combinator, I would say, this is really like nitty gritty, but it's startup funding and incubator space that will help projects get started, for very basic things. And it's like very prestigious, like ones we know have come out of it.
Dropbox came out of it, things like that.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, so that's cool. So you didn't make it into Y Combinator, but...
Oh, no. That was like, it was great. It was like failure immediately. Yeah. But at the same time, I was like, this is really fun. This is what I would like to do. It was very informative to my experience. And like the photography track on all of this was like, I had some Canon Rebel with a nifty 50 on it during this whole time. So like, I was kind of in California, but I was more like building websites and stuff and products than I was shooting photos. But it's not like I haven't had a camera on me the whole time. Right. And, to hark back a little bit to the graphic design, like photography is always part of kind of the graphic design I did, either through like stock photos of skulls or like shooting band promos or whatever. Like there's always been kind of photography aspects of what I've been working on. Right. Anyway, once I was kind of like in the startup mix, I worked with Zerply remotely from England for a while because I didn't really want to move to the US just yet. And that didn't work out, kind of fizzled out a little bit, thankfully, like just because I always like to mention them, that they're doing great now. They're now a VFX like hiring platform, and they're like helping to do Star Wars movies, Marvel movies. They're doing fantastic since they pivoted just to VFX work.
Wow.
If you would like to find VFX work or find someone to do your VFX work, go to Zerply. It's great. I text Daniel, like one of the founders, like, today. So
that's awesome.
Everybody's, but I kind of, once all that kind of wrapped up, I stayed in the mix of kind of Bay Area companies. I worked with Hipstamatic for like quite a few years, like, the original OG filter app of the iPhone, day one app store stuff.
Yeah.
Learned a lot with them, saw them launch products, things like that. But eventually kind of the draw was like, if I'm going to make it in tech or, startup stuff, I should probably spend a significant amount of time in the actual San Francisco or Bay Area. Opportunity came to move like kind of full time.
Yeah.
I took it. The opportunity didn't work out immediately, which is pretty tight. But at the same time, I ended up talking to this guy called Kyle Brager, who kind of had been an internet bud for a long time. He just moved and was working for a company called Elapath. And you mentioned Y Combinator. Elapath was effectively like, it was a startup studio, but it was kind of like a put enough monkeys in a room, they will write Shakespeare situation. It was like put enough creative people in a room with the resources they need to build the stuff they want, and something will come out of it. And during this time, I had picked up photography in more kind of like a in earnest sense. They actually gave me a Mark III as a sign-on gift, which was cool.
Wow.
And very like, yeah, my humble person doesn't understand that sort of thing. I'm like, oh my God, do I owe you money? They're like, no, it's for you. So I joined basically a company where I could build whatever I wanted. And the first thing I wanted to build was, I really dislike websites and website builders. WordPress, Squarespace, Wix, they're all like kitchen sinks of kind of, web platforms. I'm like, I just want to put photos on the internet in a non-social network kind of way.
Yeah.
And I was like, I like how Medium does it. Like, could I make Medium for photo essays? And that's the very small pitch for Exposure, which 7 years later is still going. But effectively, like, I started a storytelling company because I wanted to have a content management system for storytelling. But it originally kind of was like more photographer focused.
Yeah.
So yeah, we started that 7 years ago, and it's to this day still trucking. National Geographic Spain just published their first story with it, which is cool. So like, it's matured over the time, and I build it and run it pretty much solo these days. But it's being a photographer and building a tool that is predominantly used by photographers is very helpful. Yeah. So to kind of like reiterate, I do a lot of stuff. I am a photographer. I definitely get paid for it now and again, but my day-to-day, like my actual kind of like make a living job, is building Exposure, which is a tool for visual storytelling. Ta-da! Like I said, it's a lot of twist and turn. There's a lot of more nuance, and there's a lot of people to thank in between all this, but it's that. Hopefully that's not too complicated.
No, I love that. Exposure is one of those things to me where, at least when I first saw it, I want to say, do you know Esther Havens or Austin Mann? I feel like I had seen one of them use it. Somebody I knew used it, simple as that, right? And I was like, oh, this is interesting. And maybe this was I graduated college 2013. So maybe even back then.
Yeah, it was right there.
Was it ever exposure.co? Was it ever?
No, it's still .co. It was .so originally, which is Somalia. And I did have one email ever that said, like, I shouldn't support pirates. And I was like, I'm not actively trying to support pirates. I don't think the domain registrar for Somalia pumps money into pirates. But no, we paid exposure.co has always been our thing. Exposure.com is I think it's some sort of SEO agency in Texas who wants too much money. So one day, but
yeah, I know how that is. Okay. Yeah. So then, I've been using it. I've definitely touched base with it early on. And the biggest thing I saw was that it put above all else, it was like photography first. And that was super cool because, a lot of the sites that we photographers were looking at, it was like this tension between, text and storytelling and trying to hit your SEO goals and all that kind of stuff. And then they'd be like, hey, here's the thing I want to show you, but that has to kind of play the back burner to my marketing. And Exposure was like, no, you can read an Exposure article with like 10 photos and be like, oh, my mind is blown. I know like what I need to know. Versus like reading all this text. It's kind of like the recipes, right? When they're always like, let me tell you the story of my mother. And you're like, no, I just need to know how many cups of milk to use. Like, okay.
Yeah, I have always considered the state of photography. It's even more so now it's matured from like where Instagram started is like the majority of photography posted online is a thumbnail to a bigger story. And the bigger stories don't typically come to light, mostly because Instagram really did nail sharing a moment. And, it's matured and it's become a different beast these days.
Yeah.
But, Exposure was my reaction to like, I would like to make it as easy to post something like an Instagram photo in a long form story.
Yeah.
And that was kind of like I've tried to keep that in mind as I built. And that's why the simplicity hopefully is always there. People keep saying it's simple, which is good. But since then I've added like native video and audio. So it's kind of definitely like a multimedia platform right now, but built by a photographer. So like it will always respond that way.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. So yeah, it's a challenge in general to not build a product for hyper growth and also keep its soul. There's a co-working space in Atlanta called Switchyards, and their tagline is like "Made with Soul" in Atlanta. And the "Made with Soul" part has always has resonated with me a lot, because it's just there are very few products that like I touch and feel and use daily that I feel like are made with soul. Which that's pretty hard. That's hard to quantify, I guess,
especially digital.
From someone who's like building a product and running a business, like I've tried to like keep it incredibly, soulful in its own way. It's like, I want people to be proud of what they publish with Exposure. And I want it to be like an enjoyable part of their day at the end of the day.
Right.
Like too many services you use for either your business or just like publishing, like it's not a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So, you shouldn't have to like think too much to make it look great. That's, there's a lot of ethos that has come over the years, but it's so far so good. I mean, like I said, coming up on 8 years in itself, but it has a wide variety of storytellers, and from nonprofits like the United Nations Development Program or UN or Oxfam or USAID to sports teams like NFL and a ton of college athletics to photographers, to like a lovely lady who with her dog. She got a dog, she started an Exposure account, and now the dog is like 4 years old and she's made a post about the dog every week. So like, wow. I've seen this dog grow up, which is great. And I have similar with families. Like they have a kid, they start an Exposure account.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just really fascinating to see the world through this sort of lens, and it's thankfully self-sustainable, profitable, and it's kind of like this rare little nugget on the internet that that I almost enjoy. Is kind of nichey, and like once you know about it, it's like very helpful and cool.
Yeah. But
like not a lot of people know about it, even though it's called Exposure, and it's like the worst triple entendre name I could have named it. But
yeah.
Anyway,
I love that. What do you think of, that site you're kind of talking about, like even just running our business or photographers or whatever, like a lot of the services we touch and use every day are not one man shows, or one person shows. So like, what's that journey been like as far as, starting that? And were you ever tempted to be like, okay, yeah, let me add an employee, or let me, I want to grow, or you're chasing money, or you got a VC offering? Like, has that ever, kind of happened? Or do you think naturally, I think like you and I, you can tell when something's cool, right? You're like, okay, yeah, there's cool. It's made with soul, right? Or maybe it's got the ethos.
Tastometer is
yeah.
Right.
I won't say that I have it, but I can definitely, when it's obvious, I like it. But like, was that part of your mental plan? Was like, no, I know if I keep this small and, boutique, we'll call it, that one, I can have full control, and two, it'll maintain itself well, versus like, you mentioned Dropbox, right? It used to do one thing, and now they're like, hey, we would like to do everything.
And
so what's that tension like?
Well, I mean, Exposure had like a very weird little journey of its own, which I skipped right over. Like within Allopath, when we built it, like we were kind of like given all the resources that typically you would have to go raise money for or bootstrap for. So like it grew up in an environment where really we were just building the product. And so we knew we would charge for it, and we charged early on, and we had people in the beta paying, so we know it was working, but we didn't have to go like super growth the way you typically would if you were trying to make something work. And it was me and Kyle for a long while. And we did raise money once we spanned the company out. So we like started within a studio, and then we left with the company and incorporated Exposure Labs Inc., et cetera.
Okay.
During that time, we did raise a little bit of money, and I got to like ride my bike around San Francisco and go raise money from people who thought it was cool. And like I got to check that box, and it didn't achieve. It could have potentially achieved kind of like a hockey stick rocket ship, however you want to frame the cliche. But it just didn't kind of hit that traction during that phase. Like if it had, and like we would have. Two people building something that's growing very fast scales out very quickly. So you can't manage a really intensely growing business with a tiny team. That's why you raise money.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the reasons you raise money. But it kind of stayed in this like slow roll phase, and it kind of has stayed in there, but in a very kind of like lifestyle business friendly way in a lot of ways. And over the years, I've left kind of like the Bay Area, and like to add perspective on the whole thing, like I've just tried to calm the company down. So removing basically surface areas that could go wrong. So, made sure that the infrastructure is like really tight and reliable compared to kind of its shakiness beforehand, and removing shareholders. Like I've bought out a considerable amount of shareholders over the years. So I didn't intend to kind of end up in this particular chapter of Exposure's life as the business, but it is basically, I've always thought of it as kind of like a potential that has not been realized, but intentionally so, because it's working. Like National Geographic Spain will show up on their own. I did not do a sales call. They just came, they signed up, and they paid for it, and then they published a story.
Wow.
Like there's a lot of really interesting stuff happening, and I'm choosing, while I'm in this kind of like new bootstrappy phase / profitable / sustainable, to what to focus on. And then right now that's talking to a lot of customers and finding out what they need. So it was never the plan, and I don't want to do this alone forever by any means. And when I say like I work on this mostly alone, I have a very dependable group of kind of collaborators in my orbit. My Slack channel organization just says orbit, and it's all the people working on it right now, which are in the orbit of the company. And we have like on-call people for DevOps emergencies, things like that. Thankfully, exposure never goes down these days. But there was a period where it went down all the time, and I would just cry like all the time. It was miserable. But since then, made it a lot better. So yeah, it's gonna, there's as many futures for exposure as I kind of choose what to focus on next. And this year has been a really good I can't say that I know a ton of people with like a profitable business during a pandemic, and we've only made more money because schools had to transition like recruitment to online. So now we have schools doing all these like crazy campus tours on Exposure and things like that. It's like all these new opportunities and kind of markets appear. So yeah, it wasn't the plan to be this way, but it is a good starting point for the next chapter of the company, which is exciting.
That's really, really cool, especially COVID wise. The idea that your tool that you've made is the reason somebody can pivot, or they're like, okay, this is perfect for us. Let's do that. I didn't even think about the schools using it though. So that's really incredible. That's awesome. That's really awesome. Experience.kennesaw.edu. So Kennesaw, like not too far from Atlanta, they just have an entire campus story. You can click around, and each part of the campus is its own story. They embedded like 360 photos, and the guy that runs that account like did that very early, and it clearly paid off, which I really love. That's awesome. But yeah, we have a higher education campuses that are like now trying to like figure out how to communicate with how they're tackling COVID. And college athletics, the same thing, because college athletic recruitment is a big deal. As someone who isn't particularly into contact sports, but likes the logos and branding of contact sports, it's very interesting to see how, it's like how they market their faculty, and their faculty is mostly just stories about the coaches and things like that. And Exposure works perfectly for that. Dude, that's and also, sports has a very visual component to it. It's very, very easy to get excited about sports with sports photography. Yeah. I mean, do you, he might've even used Exposure or something like it. Do you know Benj Heish by chance?
I mean, a touch, yeah.
Yeah. So he used to shoot for the Seahawks, and he would he was shooting very differently than a traditional NFL photographer would shoot, right? Because he's him, and it was just so cool. And it was like you got to see this other side of the front page, if you will. Like you got to see the storytelling element of the fans, the reactions, and it was done in like the kind of hipstery style, which is very not NFL, very not social media appropriate, and it was super cool, and it was like just the images, just storytelling. This is really, really cool. So I love that. I think that's important. I guess I have to ask, for photographers listening, and for you as a photographer, what was more attractive about building a startup versus becoming a full-time photographer?
I don't think I really knew that many when I first went into it, and I've met many more since. And I've thankfully and very gratefully made a lot of kind of cool connections during all of this, and worked with a lot of brands. And I live in like the Instagram influencer space too. Yeah. So like I have that whole like kind of feather in my cap type thing, which is very odd. I think the more I learn about professional photography and full-time professional photography, the more respect I build for people that can make a true living from it, because it is an incredibly hard thing to do. There's multiple phases of like just straight grind until you become proficient enough in business and marketing and the operational costs and production. Because you can become a very wealthy photographer if you set out to kind of like know how to generate wealth, like licensing alone, right? Like I still don't truly understand licensing in the way I should. And I'm shooting fairly big stuff now and again, right? And I could be kind of setting myself up a lot more correctly, which is I literally have been watching videos on photo licensing this morning, because I'm like I still have trouble kind of like putting those pieces together and how it fits into building like sizable revenue as a photographer. So while like photography is like this amazing thing, which I truly love doing, and I think it's some of my favorite memories of my whole life are shooting photos. For my career part, right, it was much more attractive to like, I can get a salary, like I'm just going to get hired or build a business or whatever, versus like the photographer track, which I only learned about kind of like after I started exposure. But at the same time, it's informing like, hey, maybe like I think it's a tool to manage photo licensing or help people with photo license under exposure makes total sense. Selling prints makes total sense. So there's all these like problems about how to help people make money and do the business of photography better that could benefit from kind of the made with soul product touch, which is cool. But it's not something I still to this day, like I'm like too much of a baby to like go to be a full-time photographer. I'm like, software is too like, not cushy, but like it's a different type of career. Yeah. But it is, the people I do know that have made it their career, I'm like, it's just an incredible amount of respect for it. It's a hard game. Yeah, no, totally. It's definitely difficult and weird, but at the same time, I think for me, I look at software people and I'm like, oh, that's so cool. Like you have a product, that people use. Like I just released my first like thing for other photographers to buy. And it was so fascinating that like, one will, probably stuff you recognized 8 years ago was like, will people buy this? Will people be interested? Am I good enough? Is this good enough? Like, where are the holes that I'm not seeing? What's going to be that first support email that I have to, to fix or whatever? And it's fascinating. And I was like, this is a lot of work versus, what I do. So I love seeing kind of the software people who, one, I love that you guys can be location independent. Like you could just be like, hey, we want to move from Atlanta. I'd be like, oh, that's incredible. Whereas like most of our work is pretty localized. So, that's really. Wait, you're not going to plug your thing. You're just going to gloss over that you released a thing. Yeah. Really sponsor your own podcast, dude. This is why I need Luke in my life, is just to be like, hey, what is the thing? I genuinely want to know what the thing is. Yeah, you could show up. So I'm primarily a wedding photographer, right? So you shoot about 50 weddings a year in a highly competitive market, where at least in DC, the last I checked, there's about 20,000 wedding photographers here, right? So the competition is high. But somehow, and I think through some branding and some effort on my part, we're able to continually book as many weddings as we'd like every year and make what we want. And part of that is through
this idea of being proactive in our communication with our couples, not just being a photographer, like, hey, give me money, I'll see you on the day of, kind of leading couples through the wedding process from a photography angle, in kind of the sense that if they value photography a little bit more than the average person, let me help them create the images that they want to have at the end of their, their wedding day, right? This big investment, this big group project that they're doing, and let me do it without the stress, right? Most couples are like, I'm nervous about having my photo taken. What do I do? Where do I put my hands? Like, hey, we're going to take care of all of that for you. How does everything work? It's kind of like buying a house. Like, all your friends have done it, but no situation is particular like yours. Maybe you had a different inspector, or you had bad plumbing issues, or who knows. Yeah. And so one of the things is I have this on video, ironically, but this is not in the podcast, is this 100-page book that I've designed. And it has, over 30 topics of information, just kind of guiding couples through all their questions and things that would happen. Amazing. Things from timelines, all that stuff. And so it's been great, and couples love it. And it highly values up my business, right? Because I'm offering this expertise in addition to the service. And so listeners of the podcast, and we have a Facebook group, they were like, hey, can I get a copy of that? And so we actually created a downloadable template for them to use for their own business, and it's customizable. And then in addition, I created some kind of a few marketing videos to say, hey, here's how you can lead your clients along with that. And so we just launched like 2 weeks ago as the time of this recording, and it went really well. It was cool. It was terrifying, but it was cool because it's like, I know this is valuable, and I want to make this, I want to make it worth more than I'm charging. Or I don't know if that's something that's thought about. And
it's build once, sell twice, right? So I think everything you've told me is like makes total sense for my wedding photography experience. Like we got married in the UK, and we hired someone, like basically tele hired them, and like we didn't really know much apart from their work. And if I had a little more briefing about kind of like, if this is what you expect, this is what to do, or at least like kind of the story of that part of the wedding, I probably would have done it differently. Like, I do love our wedding photos, but I certainly wish I had some more, which I had in my brain, which I had not had any, not training, I guess, but like briefing. So that's an incredibly smart move. If you want to, you should do an abridged version of one of the most interesting chapters in Exposure. I will put it in the photography publication, and people might find it interesting. So. I
love that. I'm already like, okay, how can I do this on Exposure? That's awesome.
Just one chapter. I'd love to feature that.
That'd be super cool. It's kind of funny, like, a lot of my colleagues and friends and people who I look up to and pursue, especially like photographer Twitter, which I feel like is totally different than Instagram.
Photo Twitter is great. I love photo Twitter.
It's super good. And I got started in Twitter with a lot of design friends, and I'm not a designer by any means, but like my good friend Brian Hoff and Chad Engel, there's a lot of good people in that space that I just started following. And then now it's like, none of my photo Twitter friends are wedding photographers. We'll put it that way. So I'm like, okay, I'm always envious of you guys, or I'll see you like go shoot at a cocktail bar, and I'm like, oh, that's so cool. Like, what's Luke making? And like, that's kind of fun, and it's always interesting. So I'm like, oh, talk to these people. Anyway,
I'm very. I mean, again, that's a very smart move, and I think that's a great reaction to the experience of being a commercial, not being a commercial, but being a working photographer. Like, tooling like that is what sets you apart. And again, kind of the grind of it all is setting yourself apart in an increasingly busy playing field. Again, huge respect for anybody that's a working photographer. Like, you guys are absolutely out of your minds, and it's awesome.
That's how we do it. Especially, I was talking to somebody this morning in an interview, and I told them, I said, we shot our 1,000,000th photo last year. And they said, what? They're like, I was like, like over 10 years or so, or about 9 years, we've shot about 1 million wedding photos. And they're like, that's terrifying. Like, they'll shoot 100 photos on a shoot, or maybe 500 on a shoot. I'm like, oh, like my 3,000th photo of the day and my second photo of the day matter the same amount, versus like when I shoot like a headshot, we're going to leave when I take that last one, and you're like, okay, we got it, or okay, we're hunting for this thing. But it's weddings and events are this weird thing where every photo is important, and sometimes after you don't even know. And I always say that my job is to create memories in advance, as like, couples don't know that they want this, but when they see it, they'll go, oh, and then they have like a visual representation of this memory.
The weddings are such a very specific part of the kind of like professional exposure landscape, like professional photography landscape. I shot one elopement. Hello, Brandon, if you're gonna listen to this.
That's awesome.
And I was like noped out. I was like, this is not my energy.
Yeah.
I do like those photos very much, and it was like 3 people, and I can't imagine like 600 people. But as a photographer, who at least organizes his stuff, right? Like I have our wedding photography photos and we look at them every year, and I'm like, it's out of all the photos in the whole world I have, it's like I get the most value out of them. So you are creating those memories, and you are creating so much like the longevity of the value of those photos, and good ones too, and like personal ones. And like all my favorite photos are just like drunk idiots dancing at our wedding, and I'm like, this is fantastic. And like they're all like wonderfully captured. I mean, I'm sure other people's weddings are less filled with drunk idiots. But.
No. That's my brand, is like bring on the debaucherous crazy. Like I don't drink, so I get to be like a very astute studier of the people, the voyeur, if you will. I think too, it's that's something I say that to clients all the time, and photographers listening. I think wedding photography, at least, it's like the value goes up after wedding day, where everything else you had on your wedding, flowers, the suit, the shoes,
depreciating versus appreciating.
Exactly. And so it's kind of funny, like when people are like, oh, what should you charge for wedding photography? I'm like, well, if you tell them that it's going to last forever and accrue in value, charge whatever you want, just see if you can win.
I mean, again, like the whole strategy of like how you build wealth and, what you charge, it's, as a professional photographer, crazy, complicated puzzle that you learn over time. And it's, it's just amazing. And anyway, the book is good. I'll look at the book.
I appreciate that. No, that's really cool. That's really cool. It means a lot for the non-wedding world to be like, hey, that's a good product. Because I
will suggest the book to people that are getting married. So.
Yeah. I'm happy to help any wedding folk and all that kind of stuff. Because I was a photographer when I first started that I didn't know weddings could be fun. And so I was like, oh, I want to shoot other things. And then, at least for me, I shot my first one and I was like, oh, this is really cool. Like I got lucky, right? The first one was fun. And then I was kind of like, okay, can I make the work I want to make at weddings? And for me, I was able to. And I was like, okay, cool. And I got to see my vision work through people and help people. And it was really, really cool, and helped me learn about the world, right? Because I get to meet different people every weekend and kind of have this rotating circle of culture, right? Like one weekend I'll shoot a Jewish wedding, and then the next week I'll shoot an Ethiopian mels, and I'm like, okay, what's going on here? And then I'll shoot like a traditional white American wedding, and then I'll shoot an Indian wedding the next week. And it's like, at least here in DC, I grew up in a small town, and so my parents and we didn't know any of those people groups growing up, and so it's, at least for me, it's a way to see the world through people, and it's been it's
a really interesting way to put it. I mean, again, it's like not my market of photography, I guess, but sure. I hadn't thought about like that the ability to have a very intimate look into people's cultures through weddings and stuff like that is actually, like, as a photographer, must be actually one of the more fascinating subjects you can put a lens on. Yeah,
at least for me, because after doing this for a while, I like gear. We can talk about gear, but it's not as attractive as the stories, right? Like if I shot your wedding, it's like, oh, Luke's relationship with his parents, or Luke's friendship with a coworker. I'm like, oh yeah, they've been through some stuff. Like you get to kind of to see that, and it's really cool. I want to ask you, what does something like exposure look like? I know I don't want to push too much on it, but like, how does that grow? And then, like, is your dream to take on, larger social media stuff, or like what's next for something like that? Or is it like, hey, right now things are good, especially this year, right? Like things have increased. What is acquiring new, users? What does that look like, in a world where everything else we use every day is photocentric, right? Like there are screens on refrigerators now. So like people want to look at their Instagrams on their fridge. What does that look like in a world where it's, another site?
Well, for now, like I think about storytelling as like a timeline, right? That starts at ideation and kind of ends in kind of distribution, assimilation. Yeah. Right now, we're just in the middle part with the kind of like publishing creation part. So there's a lot of like not bandwidth. There's a lot of white space either side of the storytelling kind of timeline where we could build stuff. For now, or the immediate future is kind of helping people make money. Increasingly, the discussion around especially creators and like how the most successful creators are becoming storytellers of their own right. Like, the people with the like 4-paragraph long Instagram captions, right, are bringing a lot more value to people's lives, and people are increasingly willing to pay to support their creators, and I think the payments infrastructure and like the mentality around paying per month in a Patreon style thing has like changed significantly in the past like 5 years. Yeah. So exposure will not simply, but the simple answer is like in the future we will be working on tools to get you paid for your storytelling. Yeah, I think about it as the economy of storytelling.
Oh, that's awesome.
Which you could pay memberships to access your stories. In your case, you could put chapters of your wedding book behind a paywall if you are for photographers just looking to experience a specific thing,
that topic.
So you can make $1 or $2 off someone just looking at it,
right?
Or your favorite creator who might be going out on shoots and covering any sort of protest. They're like, hey, maybe it'd be really cool if you could like throw in some money or whatever, so you could like stream money to them in that capacity.
Yeah.
Or it's just more cookie cutter stuff like sell prints. Like we've always wanted to sell prints, and now there are a lot of great on-demand companies that have figured it out. Like, I don't want to be a print house maybe in like 10 years or whatever, but like there are companies doing it very, very well now that are all like, let us print your stuff. Like, here's all the APIs. So there's like that part of it. So that's kind of where my head is at for the foreseeable future. And there is plenty of opportunity to like do paid acquisition, things like that. But I would rather more so lean into the content marketing aspect of it. So like there will be more storytelling about our storytellers. There will be better ways to find, discover, connect with other photographers, or even if you're just looking for content. About a month and a half ago, we launched like Exposure Publications, which is basically like subreddits for particular topics of stories.
Oh, wow.
Like very early ones.
Yeah.
So travel, nonprofit, Black Lives Matter, cycling, adventure. So like if you're thinking about, hey, whenever we would travel again, I mean, the travel one's a bad example at this very point in time. But if you were like, okay, I want to go to Iceland, and I know you've been to Iceland 5 times, as it says probably on your website. But if you're thinking about going again, and you're like, I want to like get into some deep stories about Iceland, you can go to travel.exposure.co, search Iceland, and see all the stories that I've curated in from Iceland. Yeah. Which is a very unique kind of part of the internet, like finding sort of like beautifully shot and like very like wholesome travel content is really cool. So those will expand also eventually with their own native app experiences, because obviously not the browser is a certain level of distribution, the app store is a different one. So in your in your context of case, like one of the future publications will be weddings. Yeah. So wedding photographers will have the opportunity to have their own place within the Exposure kind of like distribution ecosystem type thing.
Totally.
So yeah, it's mostly just like monetization and distribution, and our own content is our own content marketing. Like I said, trying to stay away from having to put a banner on that says like, hey, we're selling Facebook we're going to do Facebook ads now, so I have to put the banner that says about the cookies. Like right now, Exposure doesn't track you at all. Like everything is anonymized, and I literally don't know who's on the site almost all the time, apart from the people logged in mostly. But and that is like one of my principles is like, I really do think a great product will sell itself, and it has done for 8 years. There is some things to tweak, change. But at the same time, like I'm in a very fortunate position where I don't have to like grow by any means. Like it's a cash stable, profitable business that could be as big as it wants. We're not posting the video, but I'm doing fingers crossed. So yeah, they're mostly focused on those areas for the foreseeable future.
That's awesome. I mean, it sounds like I loved your economy of storytelling, and then obviously creators of all kinds. I mean, you mentioned photo, video, and even audio, right? Podcasting is huge now. And I imagine people can even pull like an RSS feed if they want to, do something like that. So that's super usable for people who are not nerds, right? Like help the storytellers. We talked about WordPress before, and it's like, hey, there's a lot to that, and it can be very useful. Obviously, like lots of people use WordPress, including myself, but it's like, hey, if you just want to get it out there, if you need the attention, right, which is the first step for the know, like, and trust factor of even being hired or being, getting attention, that's awesome. But then too, like, helping people tell stories and then help storytellers make money, is like the next step. And hopefully doing the same thing versus having to do something that sells their soul, or feels incomplete or whatever.
I'm trying not to build a made with soul, not sell the soul. That's a good way.
I love it.
The podcast is a very interesting use case. atlstory.com, which is a local podcast series by Atlanta Ventures, ran by a wonderful JC. She's incredible. So each story of the podcast is like, some photos of the context of the podcast and an embed from whatever streaming service they use. And it's like, it takes them like 30 seconds to publish the episode. And then a notification will go out by email to everybody subscribed for free. So like I built these systems where like, it's definitely a non-platform specific. You don't have to worry about followers. People can just subscribe with their email if they want. And these kind of use cases have shown themselves over the years. And that's why it's now like a multimedia effort versus like just a photo driven thing. I remember having an argument with someone in support many years ago where I'm like, no, we're like photo purists. I'm like, you should do video. I'm like, no way, no video. And then like years later, I'm like, oh, video is a genius move. This is great. Again, I've been wrong 1 million times during all of this. So yeah, I think that going back to the economy of storytelling, storytelling is a very broad stroke and includes many different multimedias. And I think exposure could be really helpful to get people started, hopefully mature with them. Like I get people age out, they might need something more robust, in which case Instagram, WordPress, Squarespace, those kind of things do come in handy because they're machines. They're like big kitchen sinks worth of tools. But for the most part, people don't need those things.
Yeah, no, totally. Especially in a visual environment where it's like, all right, I just need to show you. Like that's the end of the day. While it's not behind a paywall per se, like we just need to get your attention. And then I love I think of, do you know Craig Mod? That's who I think of during this time. He's an American photographer living in Japan, and he just put out his first book. And he does a paid newsletter. And I literally thought about that. I was like, oh, he's going to drop 10 images for $1 per user or $1 a month. So again, low cost, high access kind of thing. Yep. And then, hey, if you have 1,000 or even 500 users, that's $500 a month of somewhat passive income. That's not bad for an entrepreneur. And then, obviously scalable from there. I think like that is just another way that storytellers can make money, which I think is incredible versus, Patreon is awesome. I think membership stuff this year is going to explode, right? It already has. Exactly, and like, that's like Memberful and a few other places like that. And it's been interesting to see that. That's cool. So I want to know 2021 plans. My last question is 2021 plans. Anything exposure related? Any shoots you're excited about? Things you're hoping for in the next year?
Hope everybody. That's such a loaded question.
I wanted to ask you on purpose.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to work in 3-month chunks typically. So right now, I'm building a lot of the stuff we just talked about. So releasing that towards the end of the year, towards the start of next year, like the shift to like make money with exposure will be a big one. And I think that's going to take a lot of detail oriented attention to launch and kind of massage and learn how people kind of want it to mature. Shoot wise, like I just take stuff that's interesting that comes my way. I don't really reach out to anybody.
Nice.
But I would like to go home at some point. Like I haven't seen my folks this year, and I'm hoping I don't need to go home. But I'm hoping things get safer so I can go home. I mean, I don't know. I just hope that kind of there is a significantly less decisive and stressful year. So people can calm down. Like I was saying, kind of I subscribe to the Basecamp mentality of creating a calm business where like, it's, you can make decisions better when you're calm. And this year has not been calm to live in the United States, obviously. Yeah. And again, I'm saying this as a privileged white guy. So I would hope that there can be a return to normalcy in whatever post-COVID normal looks like with a calm with the ability for people to experience any calm so they can figure out what they want to do. Like that would be great. I would love to see more of that.
Yeah.
But me personally, like, I have a lot of stuff I want to build and ship. And in between that, if I get to take a good photo now and again, I will be very pleased.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, dude, thank you. Thank you so much for coming on. Luke, where's the best place for people to go to find out more about you, engage with you about photography? And I love your work because it's like, it gives me a personal insight to Atlanta. And then where can people find out more about Exposure?
Oh, sure. Well, Exposure is exposure.co, or you can just Google Exposure. Thankfully, with a domain like that, we sit right at the top.
Nice.
Equally, you can Google me if you really want. I feel old bad for other Luke Beards in the world. I have wrecked your Google search results. Sorry, everybody. Or I'm at Luke's Beard, Luke S. Beard everywhere. If you want to come say hello and talk photography, Twitter rules for photo Twitter, in my opinion. You can load 4K photos. Come on, guys. Like Instagram, no. Twitter wears out for photo people. Come hang out. Yeah, in between that, like I'm extremely online. So if anybody does want to chat about any of this stuff, I am pretty much always available all the time because I sit here or I'm outside running or I'm taking a photo. That's the only 3 states.
I love it, man. Well, hey, thank you again. And it was awesome to have you on.
Thank you so much. I appreciate this.
What a fantastic episode, right? Luke is amazing. Super sweet, gentle guy. Love that. Really cool dude. Lots of these guests that we have on, I'm always like, hopefully after COVID, we can hang out, ideally. Like the goal is to make it if we possibly can until that time. And Luke is one of those guys I think is really fun. He could go on a run while I go bike ride next to him because he's so fast. So guys, if you're new here, subscribe to the podcast in your favorite podcast player. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts if you haven't already. Really helps the show. Means a lot. If you like the episode, definitely leave us a review. That would mean a lot. And also, we go live every month in our Facebook group for photographers. Really fun place where we come up with lots of marketing and business advice. And I just kind of share my story on there to where I want to help you. If you're a photographer trying to get into business and trying to make it, I'm here to help in any way I possibly can. That's what this podcast is for. So I love you guys already. TOGFB.com. And lastly, if you want to come say hi on Instagram, suggest a guest, be my guest, Beauty and the Beast, at Mason Photography on Instagram. Would love to see you guys there. Have a wonderful day. Keep being awesome.